Dr. Susan Trimbath, you wrote the definitive book, and I think a graphic will be put up here, but you wrote the definitive book on naked short selling, which is $100 trillion crime that is legalized by the government in so many different ways, that has destroyed 7,500 companies and innovations. It's gutted pension plans. It's just astonishing to me that this book is so important, and yet it hasn't really impacted. So tell us, please, a little bit about yourself and how you came to the book, and then we'll go into some other questions, and hopefully there's going to be a resurgence of interest in this very important book.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on, and for giving me an opportunity to try to call more attention to the problem and what I believe are the possibilities for solutions. So I don't know how far back in history you want to go, but I actually—
Where were you born?
Federal Reserve. Oh, I was born in rural southwestern Pennsylvania. On my dad's side, they were Hungarian and Slovak, and on my mom's side, they're Sicilian. So I moved to California right after, in my early 20s, so that I could finish my education, because it became very expensive in Pennsylvania to finish college. So I not only did my bachelor's in business, but I also did an MBA while I was out in California. And I worked at I was going to school part-time and working full-time at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and also the Pacific Stock Exchange in clearing and settlement. That was my first introduction to clearing and settlement. And when they closed the Pacific Securities Depository Trust Company and the Pacific Clearing Corporation, we transferred all of the securities, all the stocks and bonds, to be deposited at DTC, Depository Trust Company in New York. Well, I worked with some of their VPs in operations, and they offered me a job and moved me to New York. And that's when I started working with Depository Trust Company. So I had already had a background in clearing and settlement, and they had me working as an industry liaison with the corporate trust people. And I left there in in 94. I left there in 94, and I worked for a year in Russia with on one of these foreign aid projects. We actually helped build trade clearing and settlement, all the post-trade processing operations in Russia. I worked in Moscow and in St. Petersburg. And when I came back to the States, I still did some consulting work for some of these foreign aid projects they were working in. At that time, there was a big capital markets projects were being funded by U.S. foreign aid, USAID, and Agency for International Development. And they were doing projects in Romania and Egypt, and some projects also in some projects in Asia, a few. But when I came back to the States, my main goal was to start on my PhD in economics at New York University. I actually deferred my enrollment for a year so I could go to Russia and work on those projects. And then after I finished my PhD in economics, I was hired by Mike Milken's think tank out in California, and I moved to Santa Monica and started working on basically capital market stuff. We did projects to evaluate how sound banks were around the world, things like that. But at one point, I had a book called, my dissertation was on mergers and efficiency. And one of the findings in that was actually the fact that when financing is available, large inefficient firms get taken over and forced to become more efficient. And that was really what sort of launched my economics career, was studying mergers and efficiency.
That's awesome. And we'll get to where you noticed problems with the DTCC. So what was it that actually got you to really see that naked short selling was the sucking chest wound in Wall Street?
Yeah, that's kind of an ironic story, actually. I was first approached when I was still at DTC in 1993, about a year before I left, by a couple of corporate trust officers who worked at the two of the major New York central banks. They worked as transfer agents. Those are the guys that keep the official ownership records for all the public companies. So they approached me, and I was the industry liaison, so they knew that DTC was involved in this problem, and they asked me to ask, senior management if they would take some action. And the problem at that point was, the way it was explained to me was that through short sales and stock lending, that multiple people were able to submit votes in corporate governance issues, corporate voting matters, like electing the board of directors, approving mergers and acquisitions, those sort of things. And that because of the way that DTC was lending shares, that they were actually enabling, enhancing the problem, like making it worse than it was to begin with.
Is that
and that was
called
in 1993.
overvoting?
Overvoting, yes, exactly right. Overvoting simply means that at some point, the company, as they're taking proxy votes in and they're trying to tabulate corporate governance, elections, and all this, they're getting multiples of votes. So the number of votes coming in are a multiple of the number of shares outstanding. And they asked me to talk with DTC about it because standing in the middle as they were when it came time for stock lending, that DTC would have enough information in their hands and could actually take action. Well, they just, they just said you can't balance the world, and they just dismissed it as a problem that couldn't be dealt with. And then, as I said, I went to Russia. I finished my PhD. I'm working in Santa Monica for this think tank, and the guy that I was working with at that time was friends with Gary Jewell of Christian Smith and Jewell, Wes Christian's law firm in Houston. And one thing led to another. Next thing you know, I'm sitting at a Sidewalk Cafe in New York. I'm having coffee with Wes Christian, and he tells me about a problem that he thought was only caused by naked short selling. And I recognized immediately that this was more than just naked short selling. This was all short selling. This was all stock lending, and something in the background that we hadn't really looked at before, which was that in that DTC system, they simply allow trades to fail indefinitely. It's just sort of rollover, right? So when Wes told me about that, I told him I knew exactly what he was talking about, that it absolutely was happening, and that there were plenty of people in these self-regulatory organizations who knew what was happening.
And just to clarify, when you say fail to settle, what you really mean is people are selling stocks over and over and over again, taking the money and not delivering the stocks.
Taking the money and not delivering the stocks, yes, but also that it's systemic. So it's not just a nefarious, and there's plenty, not that there isn't plenty of that going on, but that the system itself supports supports and allows brokers to day after day after day to sell nothing, like just to sell, and take in the settlement money, but never really have to show up with the shares of bonds or stocks. It happens in both areas, and the system enables them to do that by doing something they call a resubmit, so that every day every trade that doesn't settle tonight rolls over to tomorrow with a new start date, right? And it wasn't until efforts by people like Wes Christian and others who really, raised the pitchforks over this, that they even began charging fines to the people who didn't deliver shares.
That's, that leads into your book, which I notice is actually first published in 2020. I'd had the impression it was an older book, but it's a brand new book. It's the latest word on this stuff. So why don't you spend a few minutes talking about your book and what it is you're trying to communicate with this very important book?
Right. So the book is called Naked, Short, and Greedy, the Wall Street's Failure to Deliver. And back in 2006, there was a group of us in Los Angeles who wanted to have these CFA Los Angeles put on an event to talk about these problems. So, Wes and a lot of other people, really get focused on the issue of naked short selling. And some people just say short selling, and some people talk about stock lending, stock borrowing. But in my my experience working in clearing and settlement, I know that the real issue is this failure to deliver, that trades build up in the system and don't have to be settled. Like there's no point in time where a broker is told either you deliver the shares or you're out, right? That never happens. So we tried to put this event on. The Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, of course, was quite unhappy with us. They got to the CFALA and convinced them to cancel the event. When that happened, I decided to, with my own company, STP Advisory Services, to put on the event anyway. And I worked with people like Patrick Byrne and Wayne Jett and Jim Altenbach and a few others in Los Angeles to come up with a title. And the title we came up with was Naked, Short, and Greedy. And so that's how I got the title for this book. And this book, to tell you the truth, I really wanted to get this out in 2018 because I felt that, because working with my publisher, we felt that that would be the 10-year anniversary of the financial crisis, and that it would be a good time to bring it out. But honestly, it was really hard to write because it's this narrative, and it's where most of the writing that I do is more theoretical and academic. And this is my first attempt at writing a narrative where I'm actually just telling the story. This is what happened. This is what people said. This is how people felt, right? And it's really hard. I honestly did. I almost gave up more than once and just decided that it was just too hard to do. And it was too disturbing. I mean, it's really disturbing, the stories of what happened to people. But I happened to be in Vancouver 2 summers ago, and I met with one of the gentlemen from Barker Minerals. And he continues to this day, with every dime they have, every dime they can put together, every minute of time they can spare, to work with their company, Barker Minerals, and to keep it going. And I just felt that if they were willing to do that, that all I had to do was sit down and write their story, and that I would go on and finish it. And so last fall, I got all the writing done. And what this story does is what this book does is it tells in a narrative form, like there's a whole section at the beginning that kind of explains the technicalities for anyone who doesn't know what all that is. But after that, I try to go into just more of the narrative. The entrepreneurs who had discoveries, who had ideas, who had inventions, who really believed that capitalist democracy would work for them and that they would be able to finance their ideas, right? I mean, that's the vision of capitalist democracy in America, is that if you have a great idea, if you invent that better mousetrap, right, the world will be a path to your door. And in order to get knowledge and information about your invention out there, and in order to get the funding that you need to carry that to fruition, you should be able to go to the American capital markets, right, through shareholder democracy. If people believe in your invention, they will invest in you through these public capital markets. And so that's what these inventors did and these entrepreneurs did. And there were a lot of people who believed that, again, through capitalist democracy, that they as shareholders could support those inventors and those entrepreneurs and people with great ideas and new inventions, new products. And then what happened was that through these, naked short selling, fails to deliver, just this whole shareholder democracy in shambles, all of those entrepreneurs lost their inventions. Someone like Rod Young with Eagle Tech, they actually did an asset grab where if the short sellers can push the value of your company on the public capital markets, not the actual value of your company, can push the market value down far enough, they can actually stop, completely prevent that entrepreneur from getting access to capital. And once they've done that, they can drive them out of business and simply grab their assets. And that's what they did with Rod Young. His was basically the story of the classic asset grab.
Hang on a second. I'm going to be interviewing Rodney Young, and he'll tell his story.
Sure.
But I just want to make the point here that the other advantage that these short sellers derive, which is why my own book is going to be called License to Lie, and I'm hoping that Wayne Jett and Wes Christensen will be contributing authors, is that when a company is destroyed by this illegal maneuver, all the stockholders lose standing. and therefore it's the perfect crime. There's
Right.
no ability to sue the perpetrators of this murder of a corporation and inventions. So let me move on to my next question, because obviously your book is the most current book and it's required reading. And if you do care to provide a couple of extracts or whatever, I'll certainly publish them. But I'm going to be pointing to your book and encouraging everyone to read it. Now, my preliminary research shows that Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan are the largest naked sellers through their proprietary accounts and others. And then you have thousands of naked sellers at lower levels, and they seem to be supported by law firms that announce solicitations for class action lawsuits as part of driving the stock down. You've got bashers and corrupt journalists. Why don't you just give us, as part of your book's offering, what's the ecology of naked short selling? What are all the pieces that come together that allow this to be basically a normal business of murder for hire?
Murder for hire. That's a good way to put it, murder for hire. So there's different perspectives that you can take on this. The companies, the investors, the brokers, the regulators, the attorneys, right? And I've tried to cover all of that in the new book. But for my part, like the most clear-cut evidence that I've seen came from examining two cases. One is, or two companies. One is the CMKM Diamonds, and the other was Barker Minerals in Canada. So the CMKM investors, what makes them unique is that CMKM ordered a cert pool, what they call a cert pool. So they told all their investors, get all of your certificates out of DTC into your own name. We're going to do a special dividend, and we won't give it to nominees. It only goes to individuals. It only goes to registered shareholders. And in the process of doing that, dozens of individual investors from around the world realized they had actual evidence that the brokers never had shares for them in their accounts, that they were sending them these statements every month, every quarter, all these shares in your account, all these shares in your account. And when it came time to actually get their certificates registered in their names, the brokers were saying, oh, I'm sorry, that company's not doing transfers. We deleted your account, it has no value. There's no more certificates available, et cetera, on the same days that those brokers were getting certificates for themselves and their preferred customers. So it's just so blatantly obvious that companies like Ameritrade, Royal Bank Canada, Bank of America, Bank One, like you might see that the numbers are bigger with a Merrill, a Goldman, a JP Morgan, and you might actually see more sort of short selling there. But these are brokers who, when you went to that broker and you said, I want to buy some shares of IBM, and they took your money and they said, don't worry, you have your shares of IBM. In reality, there never were any shares of IBM. We don't even have evidence that they even attempted to execute a trade. What we know is there were never any shares in that account, in that investor's account. And this happened to Patrick Byrne and his own company. It happened to dozens of investors around the world in this CMKM, for one example. Then the other one is Barker Minerals.
Before you go on, hold on 1 second, because I am being inundated by CKM Diamond shareholders. I mean, that's filling up my email, and it's obvious that there is a large, passionate group for this specific issue. Now, I've talked to Wes about it, and he thinks that case is dead. The main perpetrator has died, and there may not be a chance of recovery. I'd be very interested, on behalf of all these passionate shareholders that were treated, do you believe, as a PhD and as a market specialist, that there is any possible path to recovery in that specific case?
Okay, so let's separate two groups of people here, right? There are the shareholders who have their certificates in hand. And then there are all of these, what I call the unshareholders, all of the people who the broker took their money. They never gave them anything. They never even bought the shares for them, right? So let's separate those shareholders, unshareholders. Shareholders, I will tell you, I have to Wes, they have no claim because, as you know, shareholders in bankruptcy, they're the last guys at the table, right? And the debt holders are, first seats at the table in bankruptcy. And from everything I've read and the people I've talked to, there is no value left in what was then CMKM Diamonds, okay? So that group there, yeah, there's nothing for them. I'm sorry to say that they really don't, I don't see a claim, maybe someone else does, I don't see it. But on the other hand, the unshareholders, now I don't know about statute of limitations, this sort of thing, but, and Wes's good friend, John McQuinn used to say this all the time, it's just plain stealing. If you gave $10,000 to Ameritrade and you said, Ameritrade, buy me some shares of CMKM, and Ameritrade took your money and said, yeah, fine, no problem, but never had your shares, I believe you have a claim against Ameritrade, against that broker. Now, did the people who are writing to you, my first question is always, do you have your shares or not? If they say, yes, I have my certificate, I say, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I don't know of any claim that you have. But if instead they say to me, no, I never got my cert, I never got my shares, my instruction to them is to file a complaint against the broker. And that's where I think the opportunity is being missed to file a class action against these brokers for the fact that that broker sent them statements month after month after month telling them, right, that I have your shares. I took your money and I have your shares. And guess what? There were never any shares there. So if that's not stealing and that's not illegal, then I'm not sure what is.
That is an utterly brilliant, and to my knowledge, the first time anyone's actually put that into words in such really good direct distinction between two categories of people. Let's move on to our next question, because we do have a hard stop with 30 minutes. And I really encourage people to buy and read your book, because I actually have goosebumps. It's a case study in mass murder by financial instrument. So government complicity seems to jump out at me at every turn, from the DTCC to the SEC, which turns whistleblowers into felons, to the Senate Banking Committee, and particularly Senator Shelby, who seems to be the poster child for making all of this license to steal okay. What do you think about government complicity? And is it accidental? Is it deliberate? What are your general thoughts from an academic perspective?
Yeah, so kind of bottom line is that while, the SEC never investigated any of the complaints about naked short selling prior to the 2008 financial crisis, the Government Accountability Office came in and proved that and remanded them for absolutely ignoring all of this. There were stories at the time that, in 2008, 2009, that the guys at the SEC were, on their office computers watching porn all day and not really doing much of anything. But we also have reports that there were individual senators, individual members of Congress who were investing in funds that specialize in short selling. Right? And so why would they cut off the hand that feeds themselves? They, in fact, were investing in funds that specialize in short selling U.S. treasuries, right? So there's just no, the whole moral compass there is missing. So in the narrative version of this story, I named some of the same groups that you do: FINRA, SEC, Senate Banking Committee. I didn't really hold back on what I know, and also what's in the public knowledge. But I have another book that I did in 2015 called Lessons Not Learned. Can I just show you that one too?
Yes, hold it up toward the camera. That's good. Lessons Not Learned.
Right. 10
steps to stable financial markets. Okay, we'll link to that one also.
And I sent you the link for, but this one's shorter, of course, but it gives the legal, regulatory background. It goes into the economic and financial theories about why we should have had regulations in place to prevent all this from happening. And in that one, I also named, was the SEC and FINRA. If you go all the way back to the beginning, when this whole self-regulatory system was put in place, Congress basically put the fox is in charge of the hen house. And they said, regulate yourself. And I know from personal experience, having worked at a depository trust company and also at the clearing corporation and the depository in San Francisco, Pacific versions, that when the SEC comes in to do an audit, the first thing they say is, so what does DTC do? Right? So they really let them do what they want. When DTC writes new rules for itself and NSCC writes new rules for themselves, they write the rules, they pass by the SEC publishes it, and then it gets passed. And a lot of it is just sort of rubber stamped. Like unless the public stands up, like find that pitchfork moment, stand up and say, hey, this has got to be changed, this has got to be fixed, everything gets rubber stamped through the way they want it.
No, I completely agree with you. And this book that I'm going to write is a national intelligence estimate for the president, and it will end with like the 12-step healing process, which will include ending the self-regulatory status of the DTC and expelling all the board members that are in fact the naked short sellers.
And the brokers are also self-regulatory.
Yeah, absolutely. So that needs to be changed. Now, let me ask you very quickly, because we've only got 3 or 4 minutes left. The Holder Memorandum took jail off the table. It would seem to me that you would agree that jail should be on the table and we should be criminalizing the cheating of America.
Yeah, I actually have I'll send you a link for some articles that I did with newgeography.com. One of them was called "Where's My Perp Walk?" So I want to see the guys walked away in handcuffs for what happened in 08 and 09 and 03 and 04 and all the others of it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just that's the other part of the problem. One is that it's self-regulatory, and the other one is that because the government has never disciplined brokers and banks and depositories for this type of activity, they anticipate that they never will be disciplined for any of this activity. And so it just emboldens them even further.
All right, we're going to come back at that. And by the way, NSA knows who's been watching porn. So they have all the records. We're going to get these guys. We're going to get these guys. My best friend, one of my best colleagues is Bill Binney, the former chief technical officer of NSA. And we've been talking about how to help the president go into the NSA databases, 99% of which are unprocessed. And we can pull out every email, every game chat, all of the subterfuges they use for communicating. We've got it all. We just haven't processed it. So let me move to what may be the most important question, particularly since you've just done an attempt at a narrative. As I've gotten into this whole thing, what I'm finding is the average American doesn't get it. They're telling me, oh, Wall Street doesn't matter. That's a rich man's crapshoot. They don't get that their pensions have been gutted or that life-saving technologies have been gutted. How can you help now, if you could, for a couple of minutes, 1 minute, talk about how do you explain to the average American that America is being naked short-sold?
So, I've been doing this for a long time, and the one thing I come up against is that, well, I got my statement from my broker, and so I'm sure everything's okay. The other one is, I made 15% in my Merrill Lynch account last year. That's fine. Not knowing that you took 50 or 60% risk to get your 15% return, the big imbalance. And then the other one is that, if what you're saying is true, the government would fix it. And that's the one, that's the most dangerous moment, right? When we wish that it wasn't true, when we wish it was all a mistake and our stocks and bonds are all safely stored in some strong American bank and everything's going to be fine. It's that denial that makes you vulnerable. That's our most dangerous moment. If you can't really get angry enough to take action, right? This idea of where's your pitchfork moment? You've got to find that moment where you say, okay, this is it. I'm just not going to take this anymore. I'm going to stand up and do something about it, right? And I think that understanding, as you say, it's what they're doing. When they take this money, you put your money into an investment, and you think, the company went bankrupt, it's done, right? But the reality was that the guy you gave your money to was the one that drove that company bankrupt. So he could also get your money and all the assets of that company, right? And not recognizing that that's happening to you, it just, that sort of ignorance is not bliss. That ignorance is dangerous because they take not only from the entrepreneurs. They take everything that that entrepreneur had, all of his ideas, all of his developments and inventions and everything else, but they also put at risk the futures of the investors. You know, in America, you can't work for a living and not have money in the stock market. And that's thanks to, like, tax reform in 1986 and things where, like, the IRAs were created and all that was given to Wall Street and don't depend on Social Security anymore. Like, everybody's got skin in this game. Even if you're not out there on E-Trade buying your own stock, you're in this game. And therefore, your future is at risk and your future prosperity is at risk, which means that the future of your next generation is also at risk. And this, I think, is what I would try to communicate to people as clearly as possible.
That's very helpful. I'm looking for someone from a union or a pension fund, because one of the things I've seen is that all of the states were basically fooled or bribed into turning their pension funds over to the hedge funds. And those pension funds were then gutted. So we need to really get the understanding about the fact that even if you don't own any stock, your state employee pension fund or your small business pension fund, that's all in the crap game. So my final question: Donald Trump hears about you. He doesn't read a lot, but he hears about you. And so he's out on the golf course one day and you happen to be in his path. And he says, "Susan, I've heard about you. What are you going to tell me to do?"
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer in 3 minutes, right? Because
you only get 1 minute with Trump.
I know, like, the narrative book is 400 pages long, so it's not the kind of thing. And I used to tell, I would have clients say, like, can you say this in like 100 words or less? And I would say, well, depends on how much money you want to spend.
Let me tell you, I'm very simple. I'm not going to cut you short. I'm very sympathetic. A guy was asked once to summarize his Nobel Prize in 30 seconds, and he said, if I could summarize it in 30 seconds, it wouldn't be worth a Nobel Prize. So, but take a minute or two. What are the, or maybe there's a person. Maybe you should say, Donald Trump put Sidney Powell in charge of this, or Donald Trump make the DTCC a government agency. I don't know. What are the 2 or 3 things you would tell the president are must-dos if he wants to win against Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden in 2020?
I think I'd have to start that conversation with a question and not with a statement. And that question would be to find out whether or not, and this is for any politician, Warren, Biden, Trump, where it is. The first question is whether or not they are investing in any of the any of the funds that specialize in short selling, right? Because the chances are that they're all making money off of the back end of this. And so to imagine that I could talk to a politician, that politician would then want to change this when that politician, and most of them are, is benefiting from the results of this. I don't know. I don't see that there's really opportunity there.
Well, actually, what you're telling me is all I have to do is map for the president, because we're talking about creating a special task force, map for the president all of the investments of every senator and every congressman.
Yeah.
And that will tell us what we need to do. Let's end on that note. You're an inspiration to me.
Thanks.
I believe people have to read your book. I think you're the single most substantive expert, although I interviewed Robert Shapiro the other day, and I'm going to interview others, and I'd be glad to have you make some suggestions. So let me just end by saying, Dr. Suzanne Trimbath, I think you have really set an example for us all. You're everything that an intelligent, engaged citizen patriot should be. I thank you, and I bless you on behalf of all of us that learn from you.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
God bless you. Closing out. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.